What is up, everybody? This is your boy Claytron, aka Clayton, California. Hit that IG. I'm posting there. Not that often. I'll start posting more. How about that? And then you follow me, and then you could like and subscribe the video. That'd be super rad. Anyway, so today we are looking at, this is our weekly first week sales update video. We are looking at all the new hard rock and heavy metal releases, their first week sales. This is the current week. This is for albums released on March 15th. There's only a few of them this week. There's only 5 or 6, I believe, but one of them is particularly close to me and my heart, so it's gonna be a good one. Let's go ahead and jump right into this bad boy. I'm using metalinsider.net. This is their Metal by Numbers weekly column that goes up every Wednesday, so if you are interested in this stuff like me, go ahead and check it out. I'll link it in the description below. And our first debut this week is by Fallujah, which is a band that I am fairly close to. They've been around, I believe, since like 2007, 2006, something like that. And they're from Concord. They're from my city, basically. And so I've known these guys a really, really long time. My band Apothecary has played many, many shows with them over the years. I love those guys. I don't know, God, I think I only know like 2 of them now. I think they've replaced a few members since the last time I've seen them. Obviously the singer being the biggest one. Alex I knew fairly well. He and I worked together on a couple things, a couple shows and stuff like that. But anyway, we have Fallujah's new album, Undying Light, on Nuclear Blast. This is their second release on Nuclear Blast, and it debuted at number 126 with 930 copies sold. Now this is just traditional album sales. This is not sales plus streaming, so this is the actual traditional album sales top 200 chart. I imagine on the sales plus streaming chart, the overall cumulative Billboard 200, they probably charted much lower than 126. So yeah, 126, 930 copies in traditional sales. That's a bummer. That's a serious bummer, guys. Their last record in 2016 was called Dreamless. It was their first on Nuclear Blast, and everybody in my area freaked out when they got signed to Nuclear Blast, because they were on Unique Leader before that, which is like a, the small indie, like, slammy tech California label, right? And then they got signed to Nuclear Blast, which is like, for all intents and purposes, one of the, if not the biggest indie label in the world, especially for heavy metal. And when Fallujah got signed to Nuclear Blast, it was like, oh man, like they're like, they're shooting off into the stratosphere. They're gonna be like the next big thing, right? Everybody was so stoked for him. Dreamless in 2016 sold 4,900 copies, I believe. Let's find out. Which was their highest debut. It was everybody's favorite album. It did great. Everything I ever heard from anybody about it ever was just, oh, it's a masterpiece. Oh, Fallujah's so great. Yeah, so Dreamless debuted at number 49, selling 4,750 copies. That is incredible. Incredible for a band like Fallujah, which is, I mean, they're basically a tech death band. They're like an atmospheric tech death band, right? They used to be deathcore like 10 years ago, back when that scene was popular. So in just 3 years, they went from being basically, everybody thought they were going to be the next big thing, and then they put out Undying Light now, and it sells 25%, less than 25%, closer to 20% of what the record before it sold. In just 3 years, they had an 80% drop in sales in the first week. That's gotta hurt. That's really gotta hurt. Now, there are a few reasons for this. I think the biggest one is that they sort of were dormant for a while. Fallujah kind of fell off the map for a little bit because they had some personnel issues. Obviously, what I think the second biggest reason is, plays into the first biggest reason. They were dormant because of the second reason, that was Alex Hoffman, the singer, quit the band, and he was a very, very integral piece of that band. He wrote a lot of, or I think all of the lyrics, and he was basically the face of the band. I mean, his vocals were very interesting. They were different. I can guarantee a lot of the fan base really liked Fallujah because of the vocals, and obviously the music is a huge, huge part of it. I know Scott is the main songwriter, so the music, Dreamless is a little bit different, but the main songwriter's still there, is my point. But Alex leaving the band and him being such a focal point of that band, I think really, really was going to hurt them. And it's nothing against the new singer. He's really, really talented. I actually like their new album, Undying Light. I might like it more than Dreamless, but to be totally honest, I wasn't a huge fan of Fallujah's tech death years. I wasn't past the Harvest Wombs up until Undying Light. I wasn't big on them. And then Undying Light, they're kind of pushing more towards a, you can't really call it mainstream, but they're pushing more towards a more accessible, like, death metal sound, which I think is problem number 3, is that they're pushing towards a more mainstream death metal sound, and that's sort of alienating a lot of fans. So now they've changed their vocalist, and their vocalist now is a much more traditional death metal vocalist than I think Alex was. So I think it's the dormancy, I think it's the change in personnel, and I think it's the change in their sound that has really caused this giant sales collapse. 80% drop, not great. I still love these guys. They're still like the hometown heroes. I'm still super proud of them. I hope the album continues to sell. I hope people give it a chance and, you know, people warm up to it, and I hope it sells more. But who knows? And unfortunately for Fallujah, not so great for a debut this week. So next we have Venom Prison, which is a band from Europe, and they're on Prosthetic. Their album they're from the UK. Their second album is called Samsara, debuted at number 141 with 800 copies. Venom Prison, I didn't even know they existed up until the decapitated rape allegations thing, because Venom Prison was set to open their European tour. And as soon as Decapitated was arrested, Venom Prison was like the first band to come out against them and say, we would never want to associate ourselves with a band that could have these allegations against them, so we are pulling ourselves from the European tour, which I don't want to get into a political debate, but I don't necessarily think that that's the correct way to go about it either. However, it did elevate Venom Prison's platform because it was one of the opening bands of one of their tours speaking out against them, so it gave Venom Prison a platform to speak from. They basically rode the coattails of this major news story by pushing their name into the headline. And I don't know these guys. I don't want to blast them in any way, but that is the way that I saw it. And that was the first time I had heard of them. And then all of a sudden you see them on like, I don't know, Bloodletting Across America or whatever, the US tours they've been on lately. Those big death metal tours that are going on. I think it's Bloodletting. Is it Bloodletting? Let's find out. Oh, okay, so they were on Devastation Across the Nation, which is like a really, really big death metal like festival tour in the United States. They played with Aborted, Ingested, Psychroptic, Archaic, a bunch of big death metal bands. Yeah, so basically coming out against Decapitated gave them a bigger platform. It made more people know who they were, and they're a good band. I've heard their new record. It's really, really quality death metal. 800 copies in the United States for a band that just fairly recently had any sort of press in the United States. For them to do 800 copies, that's pretty good. So good for you, Venom Prison. Again, that high-profile Devastation tour probably helped them gain a lot of new fans in the States, so good on you guys, good on Venom Prison. 800 copies, not bad for a second album in the US, okay? Next we have the band Angel Dust, which is like that hardcore, like, I think they're like pseudo power violence or something like that. Their new album is called Pretty Buff, like Pretty Buff. It's on Roadrunner, which is, you know, like, they're not... Roadrunner's status in 2019 is definitely not what it was in 2005 or 2010 even, but Roadrunner is still, I mean, they're owned by Warner Brothers, they're a major label, and they were, for the longest time, the predominant, like, rock and metal label in the world. Roadrunner is the label that signed Nickelback, they signed Slipknot, Stone Sour, obviously, Trivium, you know, they had Dream Theater on, they had Opeth. Roadrunner is trying very hard to cultivate and develop a whole new crop of like younger bands. The biggest example I can think of is Code Orange. Roadrunner signed Code Orange, they signed like Turnstile, or Basement, one of the two, and then they signed Angel Dust. So they're trying to like analyze these trends, and hardcore as a scene is like coming up and being popular, you know, with bands like Code Orange and Knocked Loose and things like that. So Roadrunner is trying to involve themselves in that scene. So I get why they sign bands like this. So Pretty Buff debuted at number 177 with 630 copies sold. It's their third album. That's not great. Not a whole lot of growth. I'm not sure what their last record sold in its first week, but if it was less than 630, it probably wasn't that much less, because Angel Dust, they're on some pretty good tours. I see them on flyers all the time. I don't know a whole lot of people that are super into them, but I know that they're part of that scene that is really vibrant right now. So 630 copies, not great, not bad. Moving on. Noisem is next, which is like that like thrashy, grindy band. Their new album is called Cease to Exist. It's on the record label 20 Buck Spin. It sold 240 copies. I definitely would have expected more out of Noisem. 240 copies is not that awesome. I have seen them on some pretty sweet tours. I know they toured with Black Dahlia at one point. 240 is kind of low. I kind of would have expected more. So, sorry Noisem. Maybe next time. Next we have Oozing Wound, who I have never heard of. And their new record is called High Anxiety on the record label Thrill Jockey. It sold 200 copies. And it says that this is the Chicago band's fourth album, Oozing Wound. That's a spectacular name. Good on you guys. Whoever thought of that? High Anxiety. What a pertinent name to this day and age, huh? High Anxiety. Anyway, 200 copies, not great, especially if it's your fourth album. Again, I don't know anything about this band. Maybe it's their fourth album, but maybe it's the first time they've been on a record label, or maybe it's the first time they're being noticed, or maybe it's just the beginning of their platform being risen to a point in the scene where a lot of people are starting to know them. If that's the case, then 200 isn't that bad. If it's your fourth record, but it's your first on a larger scale, then 200 isn't bad. So, Oozing Wound, maybe yay, maybe nay. I haven't heard it. Who knows? And then last debut for this week is a band called Waster. Waster, and their album is called Waster, and it's self-released. It sold 170 copies. 170 copies is not bad for a self-released band that I've never heard of. This is the band's third album. That's a little more concerning, but again, if they've self-released all of their material and this is their best, then they're showing growth, and that's great. Obviously, they're learning, and if they're getting better at self-releasing things, then 170 is their best first week sales number, then good for them. 170 copies. Yeah, for a band I've never heard of, that's not bad. That's not bad. I mean, they're only, what, 50 copies, 60 copies away from Noisem, who is a fairly decently sized metal band in the scene. Good for you, Waster. Okay, so now we're in the notable sales section for this week, and as always, the best debut, or the best sales week in the notable sales section is Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, which is at number 3 from number 6 on the traditional album chart. Sold 11,000 copies, which is an 11% drop. How? The Queen movie came out in November. People are still buying the soundtrack to the movie after like almost 6 months? 5 months? And then next, as always, again, we have Greta Van Fleet, Anthem of the Peaceful Army, is at number 29 from number 25. 3,200 copies sold. A drop of 19%. Yet again, who is still buying this? Are they really growing that rapidly? They're gaining 3,200 fans every fucking week? Are you kidding? Either way, I don't want to be a hater. Good for you, Greta Van Fleet. Whatever. Next, we have Tesla, which was our number 1 debut from last week with over 20,000 copies sold. This week, they only sold 2,175 copies sold. So they went from number 3 to number 46. This is their album Shock. A 90% drop in week 2. I'm a little surprised by this. That's on the high end of the spectrum as far as like second week sales for bands in the hard rock and metal scene. Most heavy metal bands in their second week will drop between like 75 and 90%, so that's not entirely shocking. What's shocking to me is that Tesla is a band that I feel like has a lot of older fans, and a lot of older fans of rock and metal in general typically they don't need to have the album in the first week. So typically when you see older rock bands like this put out an album, they have more consistent sales across the week. So seeing a 90% drop in week 2 is kind of strange. Maybe they had a super big pre-sale number, and then after all the pre-sales went out, yeah, it just dropped like a rock. I don't know, dropped like a hot tater. I know a million metal bands that would love to sell 2,000 copies in a week, but going from 20,000 to 2,000, Queensryche has 1,550. See, this is more like what I'm talking about. Queensryche, this is their third week. They're selling 1,500 copies in their third week. That is a much more accurate representation of like a rock band with older fans, because I believe they went from like, I want to say 8,000 or 6,000 copies, somewhere in there, and then it dropped to like 2,500 or 3,000 in the second week, and then now it's at 1,500 copies. So instead of dropping like a rock, Queensryche is sort of gradually, as their album has been out longer, their sales have gradually fallen, instead of most hard rock and metal bands that are more modern, they just drop like a goddamn 10-ton hammer. Breaking Benjamin, Children of Bodom, Hexed, sold 750 copies this week. 77% drop in week 2. And that is already from a 3,300 first week debut. Not good, Chibo. Not good, Children of Bodom. This is a band where I would probably argue that their sound is just getting kind of stale, because they really have never changed it, and if you're not Slayer, you gotta change your sound a little bit. You gotta do it. I'm sorry. Piss off a few fans, but you can't just keep putting out the same stuff over and over again. People are gonna get bored. Bottom line, and I think that's happening in Children of Bodom, unfortunately. 750 copies in week 2. Okay, so thank you for watching. It's kind of a slow debut week, but we got some really cool bands this week, so I was kind of stoked on it. I was kind of stoked to check out Fallujah and all these bands. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, all that YouTube bull. And I will see you next week, my friends.